All right, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I know that these presentations, these 15-minute chunks, are probably going really fast. I want to remind you that you can stop it, you can rewind, you can pause, and watch however many times you need to have it make sense. I'm trying to go through it quickly, one, because it is a very fast camp, but also I don't want you to have to watch, 3 hours of video every day. But some of you may need to spend more time rewinding and watching the content to make sure it makes sense, or watch it to make sure you understand what doesn't make sense. Because being able to ask a question, if you come to me and ask a question like, this doesn't make sense, then I'm just going to try to present it again. But if you can understand what part of it doesn't make sense, then I can better help you to understand. So with that, we're going to move on. We have, I think, maybe 10 more slides today. So I'm not sure I'll be able to get through them all. So what I was saying is, I think we have 10 slides left, and we're not going to be able to get through them all probably in this video. But maybe we can. We'll see kind of where it goes. If we don't, then the third video is going to be pretty short, but it will have some content on it. Maybe just a summary even. So I want to talk about loops next. Every programming language has loops. Most of them have two primary loops. There are other loops that we could learn, but for the purposes of the exam, it looks like they're focusing on while and for loops. So the while loop has a really similar structure to an if statement, and we're going to look at that as far as an example goes in just a minute. But the if statement runs the event one time. So if the condition is true, it runs the event. A while loop is really just what it sounds like. While the condition is true, it runs the event. And it runs the event over and over and over and over and over again until the condition becomes false. So a while loop can run 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times. The idea of a while loop is generally the programmer or the code doesn't necessarily know exactly how many times the loop is going to activate. It could activate 5 times or it could activate 5,000 times, but the while loop can manage that. Right? It doesn't matter how many times, while the condition is true, the event happens over and over and over and over again. A for loop, in contrast to that, it has a different structure. The loop for the for is a new structure that we haven't looked at yet. But again, we'll see examples in just a second. But the for loop is limited by the number of times it can run. When you create a for loop, you create how many times you want that loop to run. So it has a very specific set of iterations. It might be 5, it might be 5,000, but when you write the code, you tell it how many times it's going to loop. Now, there's keywords that the for loop uses. I guess there's keywords for the while loop also, but the keyword is just while. You basically take the if statement and you replace if with while, and then you have a while loop. But the for loop has 3 keywords. For, this tells the interpreter that we're going to use the loop. In, this is a notation, and it tells the interpreter where to start looking for the number of iterations. And this is a different format than other programming languages. Other programming languages is even more in depth than this. This is a little bit more straightforward, I think. But range is going to set the number of times the loop will run. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of examples. So again, the while loop is exactly the same as an if statement, right? If you just replaced while with if, then you would have an if statement. But when it's a while statement, when it gets to the end of the block, so this is a print and this is an x plus equal to 1, and remember that's the same as saying x is equal to x plus 1. This line of instruction just increases x every time the loop executes. So the while loop, when it gets to the end of the block, it just starts back over and it checks the while again and says, is x less than 10? If x is less than 10, then it prints x, it increases x by 1, and then it starts over. And it runs this cycle, and we call it a loop because that's just what it's doing. It's just running in circles, basically. It'll run that circle over and over and over and over again until x is no longer less than 10. In this instance, once x equals 10, it's going to come up and it's going to say, is x less than 10? No. And then it's going to skip this block of code and just go on with the program. So I said before that Python always reads from top to bottom, and that is true. But when it gets to a while statement, it has the opportunity to cycle and just read that same section over and over and over and over again. But it never reads from bottom to top. It will skip back and then read down again, and skip back and read down again, and skip back and read down again. But it will never read from bottom to top. Now the for loop is the different structure, right? This is for, this tells it we're running the loop. X is a variable. It could be anything. In this example, I've got for x in range, the same as I have x here, but this variable could be anything. In this instance, any number, but we can run for loops with strings if we have a list or a dictionary, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So right now, we're just sticking with the integers. So for x in range 10. Now what that means, this is looking at the range of 10. Range 10 means I'm looking at all of the numbers in range from 0 all the way up to 10. With the exception of 10, right? It's not counting the top number. It's starting at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 numbers because it starts at 0. And this is a really confusing point for a lot of people, but just know that whenever you're using range, it's never going to return the number in the parentheses. It only activates all the numbers under that. So it goes as range from 0 all the way up 10 slots. So 10 slots counting 0, the top number is 9. But all it's doing is x is equal to 0, it runs the loop, it prints x, it comes back up, sets x equal to 1, runs the loop, prints x, comes back up, sets x equal to 2, prints x, comes back up. So these two blocks of code are doing the exact same thing, but they're attacking it in a little bit different way. And this is another point just of programming in general. There's always more than one way to get the result that you need, the result that you want. Some ways are more efficient. In this case, the for loop is going to be more efficient, but the while loop is more flexible here. You could change it a lot easier. And it depends on, one, what makes sense to you as the programmer, but also what makes sense to the code that you're trying to write. So these are the two examples, while and for. And we'll look at more of those when we actually get to coding. But from the presentation concept, this is what a while loop does. This is what a for loop does. Now, we want to talk about nesting loops. You can put a loop inside a loop just like we did with the if statements, right? They're just parts of code. They're just individual chunks of code that do a specific thing. But you can nest them however you want. So this is for x in range 3. It's going to run this loop 3 times. For x in range, or for y in range 3, it's going to run this loop 3 times. And then it's going to print x, y separated by a colon. Now this is really interesting because remember, we're working on a loop system. So x is going to start at 0. And when x is 0, it's going to jump down, it's going to look at this loop because we're reading from top to bottom. Y is going to start at 0. And then it's going to print x, y. So it's going to print 0, 0. But then the loop only comes back up to this 4 because we haven't solved this loop right yet. So then y will be 1. It's going to print 0, 1. It's going to go back to this loop. Y is going to be 2. It's going to print 0, 2. And then it's done with this loop. So it's going to kick out to the next line down, which is going to kick us back up to this for loop. And now x is going to be 1. Then y will start at 0 again. Y will go to 1. Y will go to 2. It's going to kick out, come all the way up, X is going to be 2 now, and then we'll have 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2 in the print. And then it'll try to kick back up, but the ranges are both ended. We've reached 3 X's and 3 Y's, and then it's just going to go on with the code. You can also nest loops inside of if statements, but you can also nest if statements inside of loops. All of these things can play together really, really well. So for X in range 8, we already know from understanding a for loop that X is going to go through the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If X is greater than 5, we're going to run a second loop where Y is in range 15. And again, that means Y is going to have the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But it's going to run into these values 8 different times because Y will be all of those values when X is 0. Y will be all of those values when X is 1. And it's just going to cycle through. But we're only printing it if X is greater than 5. So when X is 6 and 7. And when Y is greater than 12. So when Y is 13 and 14. So even though we have this huge loop, right, we're only printing if X and Y, X is greater than 5 and Y is greater than 12. We're printing. In the event that Y is less than 12, or 12 or less, I guess, then we're just printing these dashed lines. And we'll look at what that looks like in the code. But the idea is you can put an if statement under a for loop. You can put a for loop under an if statement. You could put a while loop inside of a for loop or a while loop inside of an if. All of those things, again, like I said, play really well together. Got about 4 minutes left, and we have a few keywords to talk about. I don't think I have time to get through all the keywords, so I'm just going to go ahead and pause the video, and we'll have the last video talking specifically about these 3 keywords. See you in the next video.